In the house of God, betrayal hides best in plain sight. One Sunday morning, the congregation gathered to worship, never knowing the most dangerous prayer was whispered in secret. By the time the final hymn ended, the pastor lay dead at the altar, his last sip of communion wine poisoned for a $2 million church insurance payout. This is True Crime's Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Subscribe, share, and comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Reverend Elijah Price was the kind of man whose presence could steady a restless room before he even spoke. At 58, he had led New Hope Baptist Church for over 3 decades, preaching in a voice that carried equal parts conviction and compassion. His life was simple, his car modest, his clothes humble, but his influence reached far beyond the pulpit. For the congregation, he was more than a leader, he was a shepherd. For his daughter Naomi, he was a wall she couldn't climb. Naomi Price was 24, her beauty striking and her ambition restless. Her warm brown eyes could flash with defiance just as quickly as they could soften in a smile. Growing up under her father's strict moral code had made her fluent in the language of obedience, but it also taught her how to speak in whispers when she wanted her own way. And lately, her whispers had been reserved for Jordan Lane, a 27-year-old aspiring musician with a velvet smile and the kind of easy charm that made her feel both seen and untouchable. Their romance began quietly, a chance meeting at a local open mic, small talk that stretched into long talks, and eventually nights spent in his cramped apartment where the rules of her father's house felt like another world. With Jordan, she could laugh too loudly, dress too boldly, and dream too freely. But love that thrives in the shadows often withers in the light, and Naomi knew her father would never approve. Reverend Price's disapproval of Jordan was firm and unyielding. He called him a distraction, warning Naomi that love without discipline was a fast road to ruin. He saw Jordan as a man without stability, without the kind of foundation he believed a husband should have. The more her father condemned Jordan, the tighter Naomi clung to him. And Jordan, sensing her frustration, fed it with precision. "He'll never let you live your own life," Jordan murmured one night as they lay tangled on his couch. "You're always going to be the pastor's daughter before you're Naomi. Is that really all you want to be?" Sometimes rebellion begins not with a shout, but with a whisper that tells you the chains are heavier than they really are. In those moments, a heart already aching for freedom will listen more to the echo of defiance than to the truth it once knew. As the weeks passed, Naomi began avoiding home when she could, spending longer hours with Jordan. He noticed the little details she'd drop in conversation about her father's health, the church's finances, the weight of responsibility that rested on him. One evening, over takeout and cheap wine, Naomi mentioned it without thinking. The church carried a $2 million life insurance policy on her father, meant to secure its future if he passed suddenly. Jordan's eyes flickered, the kind of flicker that hides behind a smile. $2 million, he said slowly, leaning back. "That's not just church money, baby. That's freedom." The moment greed plants itself in the soil of love, it starts changing the roots. Affection becomes calculation. Dreams become blueprints. And the person you hold becomes the means to an end. Naomi laughed at first, a short, nervous sound meant to push the thought away before it could grow teeth. But Jordan didn't laugh. He leaned back against the couch, watching her with the patience of someone who knew the right poison needed time to work. The number lingered in the air like incense. $2 million, sweet, heavy, and dangerous. Over the next week, it became their private joke, woven into casual moments like a thread of shadow through daylight. When her father skipped a family dinner for an emergency church meeting, Jordan would grin and murmur, "$2 million could fix that." If Naomi sighed about being broke, his answer was always the same. $2 million could take us anywhere. And with each repetition, the line between fantasy and intention grew thinner, until the idea was no longer absurd. It was inevitable. Jokes about sin are invitations for it to feel at home, and once welcomed, it will never leave without taking something sacred with it. One rainy Thursday night, Naomi curled into Jordan's side, the quiet thump of bass from his speakers blending with the patter on the windows. If we did it, she whispered, almost as if testing the sound of the words in the air, how would it even work? Jordan's eyes stayed on her, unblinking. It's simple. No one would suspect you. You're his daughter, the grieving one. People trust grief. Naomi's heart clenched, a part of her recoiling from the words, another part leaning toward them. That's still murder, Jordan. He tilted her chin up, his voice smooth but sharp. It's taking control. Think about it. You've lived your whole life in his shadow. This is your chance to step into the light. When love begins to justify harm, it stops being love and becomes an accomplice. Soft hands pulling you toward the edge while whispering that you can fly. In the days that followed, the plan began to take shape in stolen conversations and cautious glances. Jordan asked about the communion wine, where it was stored, who had the keys, whether anyone ever checked it before service. Naomi's answers came too easily, the details tumbling from her mouth like they'd been waiting to be spoken. Each word was another step down a path she could still turn back from, but didn't. Late one evening, Jordan set a small glass vial on the coffee table. The liquid inside was clear, catching the lamplight like it had something to hide. This, he said, his tone casual, is all we need. Naomi stared at it, her fingers tightening in her lap. What is it? Doesn't matter, he said. Tasteless, odorless, works quick. You won't even know. The vial sat between them like a third heartbeat, silent but pounding. Once a tool for death is in the room, time bends itself around the moment it will be used.
If you're enjoying this video, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. Share and like this video. It's free and won't cost anything, but it helps and encourages us to grow and do more. Thank you for your kindness, and back to the video.
Naomi reached toward it, her hand hovering just above the glass before pulling back. I need to think. Jordan's smile was patient, but in his eyes, the decision was already made. Think all you want, baby. Just remember, 2 million doesn't wait forever. And with that, the quiet pact between them stopped being an idea and became a promise, one they would seal not with rings or vows, but with poison. By the following week, Naomi's hesitation had cooled into a steady, dangerous calm. She'd memorized the layout of the church's storage room, the clink of the key her father kept on a brass ring in his study, the way the communion wine was left untouched from Saturday evening until service. On Friday night, while Reverend Price prepared his Sunday sermon in the living room, Naomi slipped into his study under the excuse of grabbing her laptop. Her fingers found the keys quickly, the small metal teeth cold against her skin. She slid them into her pocket and walked out with a smile, her father none the wiser. Stealing may not draw blood, but it is the first cut to the trust that binds a home. And once trust bleeds, it rarely heals without a scar. The next evening, she met Jordan in the church parking lot long after sunset. The building loomed dark and silent, the cross above its doors catching the pale glow of the streetlight. Inside, the smell of polished wood and candle wax filled the air. Naomi led him down the narrow hall toward the storage room, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. She unlocked the door, flicked on the light, and the rows of neatly arranged communion bottles gleamed like crimson glass soldiers. Jordan pulled the vial from his jacket and twisted off the cap. How much? Naomi asked. All of it, he said simply. We don't leave room for miracles. When greed decides the dosage, it will always demand enough to kill hope completely. She watched the clear liquid disappear into the deep red wine, vanishing as if it had never existed. Jordan swirled the bottle gently, then set it back in place among the others. The room felt colder now, as if the walls themselves had understood what had been done. It's just a drink, Jordan whispered, though his smirk betrayed the weight of the act. Naomi locked the door again, sliding the keys back into her pocket. Her pulse was quick, but her expression stayed even. Tomorrow, she said, it's over. The night before the service, Naomi lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling while the hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. She thought of her father at the pulpit, his voice rising and falling like a tide, his hand steady on the chalice. For a moment, guilt stirred, sharp and suffocating. But then she thought of $2 million, of life without curfews or lectures, of running far from the shadow of the church. And she let that vision smother the guilt until it was quiet again. Dreams built on the graves of the living do not stay beautiful. They decay from the inside until even the dreamer is left choking on the rot. Sunday morning rose warm and bright over Baton Rouge, the kind of day Reverend Elijah Price loved for worship. The church bell rang through the air as families filed in, their voices mingling in greetings and laughter. Naomi stood at the sanctuary doors beside her father, offering polite smiles to each member of the congregation. Her dress was modest, her hair neatly pulled back, every detail crafted to match the image of the dutiful pastor's daughter. But beneath her steady smile, her mind hummed with the weight of what she knew was coming. A performance of goodness is most dangerous when it hides a heart preparing for harm. Inside, the sanctuary filled with the smell of polished wood and fresh flowers. The choir's opening hymn floated through the air as Reverend Price took his place behind the pulpit, his Bible resting on the stand. Naomi slid into the front pew, her hands folded, her gaze fixed on him. Jordan slipped into a seat toward the back, his presence unnoticed by most but felt by her in the corner of her vision. She could almost feel his eyes on her neck, a silent reminder of the plan they had set in motion. Reverend Price preached with the same vigor he always carried, his voice rising and falling like waves against a shore. He spoke of forgiveness, of love, of trusting God's will. Every word struck Naomi in a way it hadn't before, like he was unknowingly speaking to the darkness growing in his own house. But she didn't let the words take root. Instead, she thought of the chalice waiting to be lifted, the poisoned wine resting inside. To ignore truth in favor of greed is to choose blindness over sight, and those who walk blind toward the abyss rarely return. When the time for communion came, the deacons moved with practiced precision, carrying the silver trays to the altar. Reverend Price took the chalice in his hands, the deep red liquid catching the light. Naomi's breath caught as he raised it, his voice steady in prayer. She felt the silence in the room grow heavy, every eye fixed on him. He sipped. For a moment, nothing happened. The hymn resumed, the choir's voices soft but steady. Then, halfway through the second verse, his words faltered. His hand trembled, the chalice slipping from his grip and clattering to the floor. Gasps rippled through the sanctuary as he staggered back, clutching his chest. Naomi shot to her feet, a gasp escaping her lips in perfect mimicry of horror. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him as he collapsed. His eyes found hers, confusion and pain flickering there. His lips moved like he was trying to speak, but no words came. To take a life in the name of freedom is to shackle your own soul to the weight of what you've done, a chain that will never loosen no matter how far you run. Someone call an ambulance. Naomi cried, her voice sharp and urgent. Around her, the congregation erupted in panic. Deacons gathered, the choir fell silent, and Jordan slipped out the side door unnoticed. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, but by then the stillness in Reverend Price's body told the truth before the machines could. Naomi's hands shook as she pressed them to her face, letting her sobs echo in the vaulted ceiling. But behind the veil of grief, her mind was already calculating the next step. Grief worn as a mask will eventually crack, and when it does, the face beneath it is almost always uglier than the one imagined. The coroner's van took her father away, the flashing lights fading into the distance as the elders of the church gathered in hushed conversation. They comforted her, offered prayers, but even in their embrace, some eyes lingered too long, their gazes heavy with questions. And in that moment, Naomi realized the hardest part of the plan wasn't over. It was just beginning. The hours after the service moved like a blur for Naomi, but every moment was heavy with the eyes of others on her. She sat in her father's office as officers asked questions about his health, his diet, whether he'd complained of anything unusual that morning. Her voice trembled in all the right places. Her hands wrung nervously in her lap. She told them he was in perfect health, that this was sudden and devastating, that she had no idea what could have caused it. Across town, Jordan watched the news from his apartment, the broadcast showing the outside of the church, the crowd of shaken parishioners, and Naomi's tear-streaked face being escorted to a waiting car. He smiled faintly, convinced they had pulled off something flawless. But sin always leaves fingerprints, and no plan born in greed is ever as clean as the dream that conceived it. Within days, the coroner's report reached the church elders. It was not a heart attack. The cause of death was poisoning, delivered through ingestion. And when they traced the timeline, the poisoned chalice had passed through only a few hands before it reached Reverend Price's. Naomi's name was among them. Whispers began to circle the pews like a cold draft, stories trading faster than facts. The elders grew wary when Naomi, still in mourning clothes, asked how soon the insurance payout could be processed and whether she could be involved in managing the church's future. Suspicion, once born, feeds itself without help, and greed has a way of turning suspicion into certainty. Detectives returned to speak with her again, and this time, their questions were sharper. They wanted to know why Jordan Lane had been present at the service but slipped out before the paramedics arrived. They asked why security cameras in the rear hall showed her entering the storage room 2 nights before her father's death. Naomi's answers were quick, but lacked the warmth of truth. And while she kept her tone steady, inside, she felt the walls tightening. Eventually, they found the key she had borrowed from her father's study still in her purse, tucked under tissues and a lipstick. A search of Jordan's apartment uncovered the empty vial, tucked in a drawer beside a stack of printed travel plans for a one-way trip to Miami. Within 48 hours, both were in custody. The trial unfolded with each detail painted in sharp, unforgiving strokes. Parishioners testifying to her father's good health, elders describing the church policy and its purpose, experts explaining the poison and how it acted so quickly. Jordan tried to distance himself, but the messages between them told the truth more clearly than either of them could deny. In the end, Naomi was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Jordan was convicted as an accomplice. Naomi was sentenced to life in prison without parole, Jordan to 25 years. When the verdict was read, the sanctuary that had once held her father's sermons now held silence, broken only by the soft sobs of those who had loved him. Greed may promise freedom, but it only delivers cages, some with bars, some without. And betrayal against the ones who raised you will not only strip you of their trust, it will strip you of yourself. If you ever find yourself trapped between love and loyalty, or longing for a life beyond the reach of those who hold authority over you, do not let that longing turn you into your own executioner. Speak to someone you trust. Reach out to those who can help, friends, counselors, even law enforcement. Freedom gained through violence is no freedom at all. It is just another kind of prison. If you were moved by this story, we want to hear from you. Could this tragedy have been prevented if greed hadn't taken root? Could love have survived if honesty had been chosen instead of betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more true crimes altar stories, and tell us where you're watching from. Until next time, remember, every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth.